My name is Rosaria, and just 2 weeks ago, I thought my life was exactly the way it should be. I had a stable job at one of the country's leading companies, a rented apartment in the center of Milan, and a relationship that, at the time, I believed had a future. Durant had been with me for 3 years, since our final year of college, where we met. We moved to this city together, but in reality, I was the one who signed the lease for the spacious apartment he moved into when I landed my dream job. I can't say we never argued during that time. Every relationship faces challenges, but I thought ours was strong enough. We made plans, dreamed of traveling together, and discussed career prospects. Of course, I understood that passion gives way to routine over time, but I believed that was the natural course of things. I trusted him. And then came that night. We were celebrating the birthday of Geltrud, one of my closest friends in Milan. She had chosen an upscale bar in the city center, and a private room was reserved for the guests. Music, laughter, camera flashes. I felt light and carefree, tipsy from the wine and the evening's atmosphere, until I stepped out into the hallway to find the restroom. I saw them as I passed by the coat check. In the dim corner lighting, someone was kissing. I wouldn't have paid much attention if not for a sharp, intuitive feeling that made me freeze. The man slightly turned his head, and my heart plummeted. It was Durant. Embracing a stranger, a tall blonde in a dark dress. She was laughing as he ran his hand along her back. I felt paralyzed. It took me a moment to realize that my lips were whispering the same words over and over. Are you kidding me? I don't remember when my voice became loud. People turned, the buzz of the party dulled. Durant recoiled as if I had struck him. Fear flashed in his eyes. Rosaria, it's not what it looks like. Don't, I cut him off, my voice trembling with fury. Don't tell me it's not what it looks like. Because it looked exactly like that. Like betrayal. Like a slap in the face. He stepped towards me, but I backed away. Please, Durant raised his hands, as if trying to calm me. Let's go home, let's talk. I laughed, and even I could hear how hollow it sounded. Home? You mean my apartment? Where you only live because I was stupid enough to believe you loved me? He said nothing. I want your things gone by tomorrow. I turned and walked out of the bar. He called after me, but I didn't stop. Geltrud caught my furious, distorted profile and followed me, hailed a taxi, but said almost nothing. I didn't cry that night. That came later, when I returned to the apartment and saw Durant's things. His clothes in the wardrobe, his cup in the kitchen, his book on the bedside table. The tears came suddenly, and I let them fall. The next 2 weeks, I lived on autopilot. I stayed late at the office, took on extra projects, anything to avoid returning to the empty apartment. It wasn't Durant I missed, but the feeling that I had something real in this city. One night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, staring at the lights of Milan. And the realization hit me, I had nothing here. Work, yes, but beyond that? No family, no roots, no home. But I did have a home. The one my father left me. I was a sophomore when he passed. Mom called me in the middle of the night, and by the time I reached my hometown, he was already gone. I was 19 and had no idea how to go on. In his will, my father left me the house, knowing I would always have a place to return to. But I never went back. First it was studies, then work. And now? Now that house remained the only thing in the world that truly belonged to me. Mom lived there alone for about a year, and then she dropped the bombshell. She had remarried, to a man named Carlos, who had 2 teenage children from a previous marriage. Mom pleaded with me, saying she was lonely and that Carlos was a good man who made her happy. Eventually, I agreed to let them move in. What else could I do? I loved my mother, and the house was too big for her to live in alone. After graduating, I got a job in Milan, and it felt like the natural choice. Part of it was driven by career opportunities. I wanted to build my life, to move forward, to grow. But if I'm honest, what really held me back was the sense that the house no longer felt like mine. It remained the home of my childhood, but not my present. Every time I visited for the holidays, I felt like a stranger. Mom had always been busy, with Carlos, with his children. Agnes and Leon were polite, but nothing more. There was an invisible, cold wall between us that no one tried to break. I felt like an outsider in the house that had once meant everything to me. Even the room I had grown up in was no longer mine. It was a space occupied by memories and a new order I didn't belong to. And so, I sat in my half-empty apartment in Milan, scrolling through my phone, ignoring messages from Durant, when it suddenly hit me, it was time to go home. My company had a branch just half an hour's drive from Bergamo. It was the perfect solution: transfer, reclaim my home, start over. The next morning, I called my boss, Gaston, and asked for a meeting. I didn't waste time and got straight to the point. I need to request a transfer to the branch closer to Bergamo, I said. He studied me carefully, with the kind of attention reserved for employees whose decisions could shape the future of projects. "You're one of our best analysts, Rosaria," he said after a heavy sigh. "I'd hate to lose you. Let me make a few calls. We'll see what can be done." I spent the next 3 days in tense anticipation. Then Gaston confirmed the transfer. My salary would be slightly reduced, but I understood that the cost of living in Bergamo was significantly lower than in Milan. It was a compromise I was willing to accept. That evening, I called my mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, dear. I'm moving back home." There was silence, and I thought I could hear her breath catch. "Oh. When?" "In about 2 weeks. I just wanted to let you know so you could prepare my room." Another pause. Longer this time. "Your room. Agnes has been using that room since she started college." I gripped the phone tighter, as if that could strengthen my resolve. "Well, she'll have to move to one of the other bedrooms." "It's my house, Mom." Of course," she replied quickly, too quickly. "It's just unexpected. But we'll be happy to have you home." Something in her voice made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. "Great. See you soon." When I hung up, an odd sense of unease settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that my return wouldn't be as simple as I'd hoped. The 2 weeks until the move passed in a blur. I terminated my lease, sold some of the furniture that felt pointless and foreign, and packed the things that truly mattered to me. A friend organized a farewell party, at a different bar, not the one where my life had unraveled. Saying goodbye felt strange, but I knew I was closing a door that should have been shut long ago. The trip to Bergamo took almost 6 hours. The whole way, I kept wondering, what if everything had changed? What if I didn't recognize the place? But most of all, what if I didn't recognize myself? When I pulled up to the house, my heart pounded. The 2-story colonial-style house stood as it always had, but the paint on the facade had darkened, and the flower beds my mother had once tended so carefully were now overgrown. I hadn't even stepped out of the car when the door opened. Mom stood on the porch, wringing her hands. She looked older than I remembered. There were new streaks of gray in her chestnut hair, and weariness showed in her eyes. But the smile she gave me was the same as in my childhood. "Welcome home," she said, opening her arms. I hugged her, my heart clenching at the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume. "Hi, Mom." Carlos appeared in the doorway. He said nothing, just watched, reserved and distant. His face, as always, was hard to read. Tall, with thinning hair, he seemed like a shadow in this house. and I once again felt how foreign he was to me. "Hi, Carlos," I said, giving a polite nod. He returned the nod, brief and indifferent. His gaze slid to my car, packed to the brim with boxes and suitcases. "Looks like you brought your whole life with you," Carlos remarked, his voice neutral, almost indifferent. "Just the essentials," I replied, forcing a smile. "Mostly clothes and work stuff." He gave a short, humorless chuckle but didn't offer to help with the bags. I bit back my irritation and said nothing. Agnes moved her things into the guest room. "Your old room is ready," he said, his tone making it sound like a reluctant concession. Mom shot him a glance I couldn't quite decipher, then turned to me. "Come in, dear, you must be tired from the road." I stepped over the threshold, inhaling air that smelled of dust, wood, and something faintly foreign. Inside, the house felt both familiar and strange. The walls, the layout, everything was the same, but the details. The furniture had been rearranged, shelves stood empty where my father's books once were, and the decorations I remembered from childhood had disappeared, replaced by things unfamiliar to me. It felt as if the house I had grown up in was slowly losing its connection to me, reshaped to fit a new life, a life in which, it seemed, I no longer had a place. As we passed through the dining room, Agnes and Leon appeared on the staircase. Leon, now 17, had grown taller and looked at me from under his brow. He gave me an awkward nod. "Hey," he said shortly. "Hey, Leon." "You've gotten so tall," I said, trying to sound warm, but he had already looked away. Agnes, dressed in what looked like the latest collection from a trendy fashion brand, stood with her arms crossed. Her expression said it all. She wasn't pleased with my arrival. "So, you're really staying?" she asked, her voice cold, without a hint of welcome. "Agnes," Mom said gently but firmly. "What?" Agnes shrugged. "It's no secret. She's moving in." I had to spend the whole day dragging my stuff into that tiny room. I took a deep breath. "I'm happy to see you too, Agnes." No response. She just turned and walked up the stairs, leaving us in silence. Dinner that evening was tense. Carlos talked about his work at the local bank, his voice monotone. Leon mumbled replies when spoken to, and Agnes picked at her food, throwing me brief, irritated glances. Every clink of the fork on the plate sounded like a tolling bell. "So," Carlos said suddenly, setting his fork down, "how long are you planning to stay?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "I'm not just staying. I'm moving in. This is my permanent home now." Carlos shot a quick glance at my mother. Of course," he said, but there was a hint of displeasure in his tone. "It's just, we've grown used to certain arrangements here. I'm sure we'll all adapt." "I'll be working full-time at the branch," I replied evenly. "So, I won't be home most of the day anyway." "I had to give up the big room because of you," Agnes said sharply, her voice ringing with irritation. "I've been using it for 2 years, and now I'm stuck in that closet-sized guest room." I looked at Mom, expecting her to intervene, to remind Agnes that this was my house and my room. But she said nothing. Even Carlos remained silent. Their unspoken support of Agnes felt like a quiet dismissal, as if my rights in this house were an uncomfortable topic better left untouched. I set my fork down and said slowly, "Actually, the entire house belongs to me. Dad left it to me in his will, so technically, I can choose any room I want." Agnes stood up sharply, her chair scraping against the floor, almost tipping over. "No, that's nonsense." Her voice trembled with anger. "I've set everything up in that room for college, my desk, my vanity, everything. And now I have to squeeze it all into a room half the size because Princess Rosaria decided to grace us with her presence." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard that the dishes in the cabinet rattled. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the table. Mom gave me a reproachful look. Was it really necessary to upset her? I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. I upset her. She started complaining the moment I walked in. Mom's face hardened. "Not tonight," she said quietly. "You're tired from the road. Tomorrow, things will seem better." But the next day, and even the day after that, nothing seemed better. I started my new job, throwing myself into learning the processes at the branch. The office was smaller than the one in Milan, but the work was familiar, and I adjusted quickly. Immersing myself in tasks, reports, and figures gave me a sense of control that I desperately lacked at home. At the same time, I reconnected with a few old school friends who still lived in the area. Especially Megan, my best friend from high school. She now worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and though our conversations were tinged with nostalgia, they brought me back to a time when everything felt simpler. 2 weeks after the move, I came home after a long day at work. The house smelled of wood, dust, and something else, something I couldn't quite call my own. I opened the door and froze. Agnes was decorating the living room with garlands and balloons. The room looked as if it was being prepared for a celebration. "What's this?" I asked, setting my laptop bag down by the door. "My birthday," Agnes replied without even glancing at me. "On Saturday." "I see." I tried to keep my tone polite, though all I felt was irritation. "Do you want me to get you something?" Agnes gave a short, dismissive laugh as she hummed the last garland. "No need. You won't be here anyway." The words hung in the air like heavy dust. "Excuse me?" I asked, not understanding what she meant. But before she could answer, Mom appeared in the doorway, nervously tugging at her sweater sleeve. "Rosaria, dear, can I talk to you for a moment?" I nodded silently, and she led me out onto the back porch. The place where, as a child, I used to sit and watch the sunset. But now it was different. Where the wooden chairs had once been was now cluttered with Carlos's gardening tools. "Agnes is inviting her friends over for her birthday," Mom began, fingers entwined. She was hoping to have the house to herself. I stared at her. "You want me to leave?" "From my own house?" "Well, just for a few hours. You could go to the movies, have dinner with Megan. You mentioned her recently." I gripped the railing, disbelief tightening my chest. "Are you serious?" "I'm not leaving my own house for Agnes's party. I wasn't even invited." Mom sighed, lowering her gaze. "Please, don't make this harder than it is. Things have been tense since you moved back." "Tense?" The bitterness burned my throat. "Maybe that's because everyone's acting like I'm intruding, like I don't belong here. I didn't ask you to move out, but I'd at least expect some respect." Mom looked uncertain, her fingers twisting together. "I just thought you'd do it for me." And there it was, in her words, the pain, as though I was the reason for all this discomfort. As though I was the one intruding, ruining their quiet life. I straightened. "I won't make a scene. I'll stay in my room, but I'm not leaving." Mom seemed to give up. "I'll let Agnes know at dinner." And she did. But her voice lacked firmness. "I'll just move the party to Luciano's," Agnes declared dramatically over dinner, her gaze sweeping over us before fixing on me. "Some people," she said, her eyes sharp, "just can't compromise." I held back. Bit my tongue and focused on my food. There was no point arguing. It wouldn't change anything. Carlos muttered something about how expensive it was to host parties at restaurants, but I ignored him. Leon looked as bored as ever, lost in his own thoughts. On Saturday, Agnes left for her party. The house fell silent, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't a hostile silence, it was freeing. I stayed in my pajamas, watched old movies in the living room, and that simple routine felt like a luxury. For the first time in weeks, I felt at home. But it was an illusion. In the months that followed, my life settled into a routine. I went to work, came home, and avoided conflict. It was hard to think of them as family. I ate dinner quickly, then hid in my room or met up with Megan. It was easier than sitting at the same table and pretending we were a real family. Work was going well. My boss appreciated my experience from the Milan office, and I was already being considered for a team leader position. That gave me strength. At least there, at the office, I felt valued. The commute wasn't bad, and sometimes I even enjoyed it. Occasionally, during lunch breaks, I would drive past my old school or the park where Dad once taught me how to cast a fishing line. Those places still held pieces of me, the parts one was losing every day I spent in a house that no longer felt like mine. One evening, at the end of summer, I came home and saw Mom and Carlos sitting at the dining table. Before them lay a neat stack of papers. The tension in the room was almost tangible, like the static before a storm. They looked up when I entered, and something in their expressions made me stop. "Rosaria," Mom said, her voice oddly formal, as though the bond between us had dissolved into something dry and distant. "We need to talk." My heart thudded heavily, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I sat down silently, glancing at the papers. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to hide my worry. "Has something happened?" Mom slid a few sheets of paper toward me. I glanced at them and understood immediately: bills. Electricity, water, heating. Numbers that stared back at me like stern judges. "We need to discuss the financial situation," she said, avoiding my gaze. "What about it?" I asked, my voice cautious. Carlos cleared his throat, as if preparing to deliver important news. "Since you moved in, the cost of maintaining the house has increased significantly," he said. "Water, electricity, heating, everything has gone up." I tensed. "I contribute," I reminded them, striving to keep my voice calm. "I give you $300 every month. That's more than my share for food." Mom and Carlos exchanged a look, and in that silent exchange, I felt the walls begin to close in. "That's just for groceries," Mom said quietly. "It doesn't cover the other expenses." A chill spread through me, one that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What are you saying?" Carlos lifted his chin, his face turning unreadable. "We think it would be fair for you to pay rent," he said. $1,000 a month. The world tilted slightly. You're serious?" My voice wavered, but I fought to maintain my composure. "This is my house. My father left it to me. If anyone should be collecting rent, it's me." Carlos's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Listen, young lady. We've kept this house in order for 8 years while you were off living your life in the lawn. We paid the taxes, fixed the roof, replaced the water heater." I swallowed hard, trying to contain the rising wave of anger. "I never asked you to do that. And I offered to help with major expenses more than once, but Mom always said you had it covered." I turned to her, hoping she would confirm my words. But she only lowered her eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mom," I said quietly, "my salary is lower now. You can't seriously expect me to pay rent for my own house." Carlos gave a cold, humorless laugh. "If you can't contribute financially," he said, "maybe you should find another place to live." The words hit me like a stone to the chest. I turned to Mom, sure she would object, certain she would raise her voice, stop her husband from speaking to her daughter that way. But she only gave a weak nod. I don't remember standing up from the table. I don't remember leaving the room, only that I made it to my bedroom before the tears could betray me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window, where dusk was already settling. The house was silent, but in my head, noise roared, thoughts sharp as shattered glass, cutting into my mind. Sleep never came that night. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything went wrong. The moment my mother became a stranger. By morning, the shock had burned away, leaving only anger. I got up, showered, dressed, and went to work, one thought repeating in my mind: confrontation was inevitable. And it would happen today. When I came down for breakfast, the whole family was already at the table. Mom, Carlos, Leon hunched over his cereal, and Agnes, who slowly lifted her eyes when I entered. Her smile was warm, but beneath it was a mocking edge. "So," she said sweetly as I poured myself coffee, "when will you start paying rent? Or are you moving out?" Something inside me snapped. I set my cup down carefully, turned to her, and, for the first time in a long while, smiled. "Actually," I said, "I've already made a decision." The room went still, heavy with silence, like the pause before a storm. "This house belongs to me," I said, my voice calm, almost icy. "My father left it to me. Everyone living here does so because I allow it." Carlos opened his mouth, ready to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "Starting next month, there will be a new arrangement. Each of you," I said, letting my gaze sweep over them, "Mom, Carlos, Agnes, Leon, will pay me rent. $500 per person, per month. That's $2,000 in total." The stunned silence that followed was almost tangible. No one knew what to say. Agnes was the first to break the silence, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're joking," she snapped, her voice sharp and offended. Mom opened her mouth, but her voice was barely a whisper, a sound that barely reached me. You can't be serious." I took a sip of coffee, oddly calm in the face of their outrage. "I'm completely serious," I said. "Considering the market rental rates in this area, divided by 4, it's actually very reasonable." Agnes scoffed, her face flushing with anger. "You can't charge us rent. That's insane." "If you don't like the terms," I said, setting my cup down on the table, "you're free to find other accommodation. I'm sure there are plenty of options in Bergamo." Carlos leaned forward, his face hardening. "You'd kick your own mother out?" I held his gaze, refusing to look away. "No. I would charge a fair rent for property you don't own. After everything we've done for you." Mom's voice trembled. "We maintained this house, paid the bills, took care of everything while you lived your life in the lawn. Living here for free," I added. "And now you want me to pay rent for my own property? How is that any different from what I'm proposing?" There was no answer. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. "Think it over. Let me know what you decide." The drive to work that day was a blur. Part of me couldn't believe what I'd just done, but another, stronger part knew it had been a long time coming. They had crossed a line, and something had to change. That evening, I picked up takeout and ate in my room. The house was silent, as if it had already been emptied. No one tried to talk to me. No one knocked on my door. And it stayed that way the next day, and the day after that. I became a ghost in my own home. Ignored. Even by Mom. I bought my own groceries and kept them separate. I did my laundry when no one was around. I missed my mother, missed the woman who had once comforted me after every failure, who could calm me with just a glance. But I wouldn't back down. Not this time. 2 weeks passed. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, Mom and Carlos cornered me in the living room. "We've made a decision," Carlos said, his voice dry and detached. "We're moving out. We found an apartment on the other side of town." I nodded slowly, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over me. Relief that it would soon be over. sadness that it had come to this, and anger. Deep, cold anger that Mom had put me in this position to begin with. When? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Next weekend, Mom replied, not meeting my eyes. We've already signed the lease, Carlos added, his gaze cold and defiant. And I'm taking what I paid for. The washing machine, the dishwasher, the TV in the living room. Fine, I said sharply, cutting off the conversation. Take whatever you bought. They nodded silently. And that was it. No more words. The following week passed to the sounds of packing. Agnes slammed doors and drawers with almost sadistic satisfaction, each bang a reminder that she wasn't leaving by choice. Leon kept to himself, silent, avoiding my eyes. Mom barely spoke to me, her focus entirely on boxes and moving logistics. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. More than any argument. Because in that silence, Mom made her choice. And it wasn't me. On Friday evening, Carlos brought the moving truck. I stayed back, watching as they carried out furniture and boxes. Some of the items had belonged to my father, a table, kitchenware, old dishes I remembered from childhood. But I didn't have the strength to fight for them. I let them go. Let them take whatever they wanted. But when I saw them struggling with the old grandfather clock, my heart clenched. That clock had stood in the hallway for as long as I could remember. It had been my father's pride, a symbol of his love for the home he had built. That stays, I said firmly, stepping into the hallway. Carlos frowned, casting me a sharp look. I paid for its repair 3 years ago. It wasn't working when your father died. That clock belonged to my father, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. He bought it from an antique shop the year I was born. It stays. For a moment, I thought Carlos would argue, that he'd bring up fairness or investment. But Mom placed a hand on his shoulder and shook her head slightly. His lips pressed into a hard line, but he said nothing. They stepped away from the clock, and I knew I had won that battle. It was their final trip to the truck. The furniture was gone, the boxes loaded. Mom lingered in the kitchen, as if searching for something. Or maybe just the right words. I never thought it would end like this, she said quietly. Neither did I replied. But you left me no choice. She turned away, her shoulders drooping slightly. I thought you'd be reasonable. Reasonable? I repeated, feeling anger rise within me again. Was it reasonable to let Agnes treat me like an unwelcome guest? Was it reasonable to ask me to leave my own home for her birthday? Was it reasonable to take your husband's side over your daughter's at every turn? Mom took a slow breath, but her face remained emotionless. Carlos was kind to me, Rosaria, she said. He took care of us after your father died. He moved into my house and acted like he owned it. And you let him. Mom sighed heavily. I see we're not going to agree. I need to go. They're waiting for me. I said nothing. I just watched her walk away without looking back. And that was how they left. The house, which for months had felt overcrowded and hostile, suddenly became painfully empty. That first night alone, I wandered from room to room, counting what was left and what I would need to replace. The living room was missing the sofa and TV, the kitchen lacked a microwave and coffee maker. 3 bedrooms stood bare, stripped of beds and dressers. But instead of sadness or loneliness, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was my home. Now, truly mine. I could do whatever I wanted with it. Fill it with my own choices. Make it a home again. The next day, I went to the nearest home goods store. I bought a new sofa, a coffee maker, basic kitchen supplies. I ordered a bed online and scheduled a mattress delivery for the weekend. Then I gave the house a deep cleaning. I opened the windows, letting fresh air in. With every wipe of a cloth, every push of the vacuum, it felt like I was sweeping away the remnants of the past. By Monday, I returned to work with a light heart. "You seem different," my manager said during our lunch break. "More relaxed." I smiled. "I'm home." Everything had settled. That evening, Megan came by to see the new setup. She whistled as she walked through the nearly empty rooms. "Wow. They really took everything, huh?" "Yeah," I shrugged. "But now I get to start over. Make the house mine again." She helped me arrange the new furniture, hang a few pictures. I filled frames with old photos, Dad and me fishing, my graduation, friends from the lawn. I covered the bare walls with memories that mattered. Later, as we sat on the new sofa, sipping wine from coffee mugs, because I hadn't bought glassware yet, Megan asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said finally. "I miss my mom. I wish things had turned out differently. But I don't regret standing up for myself." My birthday was in early October. I didn't expect to hear from Mom, but the silence still hurt. Aunt Susan called to wish me a happy birthday. There was an awkwardness in her voice. "By the way," she said cautiously, "I saw your mom and Carlos at the store. They seem to be doing well." She didn't ask about me. The pause dragged on, and in that silence, I found my answer. "Give her time," Aunt Susan said when the quiet became too heavy. "She's stubborn. Just like you. I don't talk to my mother or her family now. They didn't give me their new address, and I didn't ask. Mom didn't even call me on my birthday. And that told me everything I needed to know. She made her choice. And it wasn't me. But I hear from relatives that they're doing fine, and that's enough for me. I live alone. But for the first time in years, I don't feel lonely. I feel at peace. This is my home. And I've taken it back. Whatever lies ahead, I know I made the right choice. Dad would be proud." Share your thoughts about this story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.